Fedorova, Kim Nally, bassist vocalist Doug.
I'm going to call the meeting of the Planning and Transportation Commission for February 26, 2014 to order, and it's 6:15. Secretary will please call roll.
Commissioner Alchek. Present. Acting Chair Keller.
Present.
Commissioner King.
Present.
Commissioner Martinez. Chair Michael. Acting Vice Chair Tanaka.
Present.
4 present.
The first thing, do you want to make the announcement that you were referring to about recruitment?
Yes, please. So the city clerk's office has asked if I would make an announcement to be part of the future of Palo Alto. And they are currently recruiting for positions for the Planning and Transportation Commission, the Human Relations Commission, the Library Advisory Commission, and the Public Art Commission. And you can contact them at 329-2571. Flyers are also back on the public table. And for more information or to apply, you can go to, I believe, the clerk's website for Board and Commission Recruitment Program or Board and Commission information. So we are looking to fill former Commissioner Pinelli's position. Thank you.
Thank you, Secretary Elner. I'd also add my encouragement for people to apply, and also encourage people to come to Planning Commission meetings. It's the best way to find out what we do, or listen to us on TV. I guess if you're already doing that, then you know a little bit of what we do. And also feel free to contact any of the current commissioners. I'm sure any of us would be happy to talk to you about what it is to be a commissioner. The first item on our, is oral communications, and I'm seeing no cards. We'll end oral communications. The next thing is the director's report.
Thank you and good evening, Planning Commission. Erin Ackman, Assistant Planning Director. Director Gittleman sends her apologies. She's feeling under the weather, so she will not be here tonight. I just wanted to recap. There was a big night for transportation, the Transportation Division at the last council meeting. There were 5 big items on the agenda. The first was the CalAv Streetscape project. The contract for that was approved. It was pulled from the, was initially on the consent calendar and was pulled from the consent calendar. They asked a few questions. The council only made one small change, which was reducing the contingency budget from 15% to 10%, then approved it. So we expect construction to start in March and there to be an official groundbreaking. We're currently scheduling that, as well as a couple outreach meetings with the merchants before it begins, to introduce them to the contracting team and get a point of contact. The Lot R attendant program was also approved. This is a attendant program to park cars during peak times in Lot R. This is just related to the permit parking on the upper stories of the garage, and it's expected to yield somewhere around 40 additional spaces due to this program. So the contract was approved for up to 3 years, but staff is treating it as a 1-year trial program. In general, we're trying to aim to more efficiently use our existing parking supply before we go and build new spaces. So this is something that we're going to try out on a 1-year period and see if it works, and see if it's worth to go into other lots as well. The biggest item of the night, the council approved a number of different transportation demand management programs. This is referred to as the 3-legged stool in transportation policy recently, which was a focus on parking policies related to additional parking supply, residential permit parking, and now transportation demand management. There were 5 separate actions taken. The first was direction for the city manager to solicit a request for proposals to establish a transportation management association. The second was to expand the Palo Alto shuttle, to once again send out an RFP for, we had a basic idea where we thought an expanded shuttle could go, but we also invited prospective shuttle providers to give us their ideas of where it would make sense from a ridership and from an economic standpoint to provide additional shuttle service. Solicit proposals for car share services downtown in city-owned lots. Evaluate rideshare tools, including a trial of a to-go rideshare app. There was a second agenda item that got combined to these to establish a Go Pass program for city employees. And what this will do is any employee that is willing to give up their parking pass within the City Hall basement here will get a free Caltrain pass. And the cool part about a Go Pass is it's an unlimited pass. You could use it in any zone, and you could use it on weekends. So we expect probably around 50 or so spaces to be given up, and to increase capacity by about 50 spaces within the City Hall parking lot by doing this program. So those were the major ones. Coming next week is another major item related to the comprehensive plan. We'll be going forward with an expanded scope of work falling within our Palo Alto process. So I encourage the commissioners to take a look at that agenda item when it comes out and perhaps attend the meeting as well.
Thank you, and I also want to add that the to-go is spelled T-W-O-G-O, as in two people go. Talking about the city council meetings, I'm going to go slightly out of order and see if there's any volunteers for people to serve as the commission rep for the council for the month of March. Anybody want to volunteer? Okay, so we have a volunteer from Commissioner. What?
I'm out of town a significant
You're out there.
portion of April.
Okay. No, we're talking about March.
I know, so,
We'll do March.
yeah, but I'll be out of town next week. But yes.
I think we have interest from both Commissioner Olczak and Commissioner King. Maybe you can figure out what your schedules are and work it out so you can cover that and let us know which dates you cover. Thank you. Okay, so let's go to the first agenda item, which is the Urban Forest Master Plan, which is on our consent calendar. So our procedure is that unless anybody pulls it off for consent, we just entertain a motion to approve it.
So moved.
Motion by Commissioner King, second by Commissioner Tanaka, Acting Vice Chair Tanaka. Any comments? All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
All opposed? That passes unanimously with Commissioner King, Acting Vice Chair Tanaka, Acting Chair Keller, and Commissioner Olczak all voting in favor, and Commissioner Martinez and Chair Michael absent. Okay, the next item is the governance element, and I don't have any cards for that either, so if somebody wishes to speak, please bring them up forward. So the governance element is a recommendation for review of the governance element of the comprehensive plan, I guess we'll start with a staff report.
Great. Thank you, Commissioners. I'm Stephen Turner, Advanced Planning Manager, and staff wanted to provide the Commission with a progress update on the governance chapter and request that the Commission temporarily suspend the review of the chapter so that the element can be reviewed as part of the Our Palo Alto effort. Commissioners, this is the final chapter of the comprehensive plan to undergo an overall review by the Commission and the Commission subcommittees, as well as city staff. The governance, it's really a chapter. We've been interchangeably, I think, calling it an element, but it in fact is not an element of the comprehensive plan. It is a chapter. It's not a required portion of a comprehensive or general plan per state requirements, but it is still very important part of the comprehensive plan. The current chapter provides a lot of good information about the framework of Palo Alto's government, the organizational structure of our departments. It provides goals, policies, and programs for creating opportunities for public participation, promoting civic and neighborhood organizations. really promoting the city as a regional leader for regional-wide issues, promotes volunteerism throughout the city. It really suggests that we find new ways to collaborate on land use and development changes that are happening within the city, and ways to improve the development review process. So there's a lot of good, really meaty portions and information within the chapter. But the subcommittee that has been working on this, and these are Commissioners Michael, Martinez, and Alcheck, I think the subcommittee and city staff felt that this chapter could do a whole lot more. The subcommittee met for a few times and came up with a general structure that's described in your staff report and in more detail in your attachments. To provide more additional information about important elements that perhaps were not included in part of the governance chapter when it was adopted in 1998. These are things such as providing information including a government that is responsible to its citizens, information about efficiency and transparency of local government, our fiscal responsibilities, a section talking specifically about the Palo Alto process, policies that talk about the engagement of the community and the expertise that is out in the city, and the importance of infrastructure and the importance of that to our city. There was also talk about moving this chapter from its current position in the very back of the comprehensive plan to a more prominent position almost in the front. I think the thought was, and this can be talked about by commissioners, was that this chapter really could be a very important overview of Palo Alto government and really the touchstone policies and programs and goals that are very important to us that really affect all elements within the comprehensive plan. And the proposal was then to reorganize and reformat the chapter and put it in the front almost as an introduction to the comprehensive plan and the city as a whole. Really for people who may not have engaged with a comprehensive plan before and really just trying to get a handle or an understanding about what this document does and how it relates to the functions and operations of the city, the subcommittee felt that there was a potential to really highlight this element at the very beginning of the comprehensive plan. No decisions really have been made at this point to do that, but I think that was an overall kind of view of the subcommittee at the time that we were meeting. Staff is recommending at this time that the Planning Commission temporarily delay the further review of this chapter and really wait until the Our Palo Alto effort starts in earnest. The thought was that the Our Palo Alto effort, which includes an extensive community engagement exercise, will ultimately obtain a lot of good, valuable community input that could affect this chapter in a very positive way. So instead of trying to anticipate what the community might want through further review with the Planning and Transportation Commission subcommittee, the thought was to really hold off any additional work, let the public engagement exercises happen, take the information we receive, and then meet back with the subcommittee later on in the process to finalize this particular chapter. And we think that we can create a stronger chapter as a result of just putting a short delay on our work. The staff's recommendation, again, is to have the Commission temporarily delay the review of the chapter so that our Palo Alto effort and community engagement exercises can be initiated in order to gain more valuable community input. So that concludes the staff report. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Who would like to lead off? Acting Vice Chair Tanaka.
I'd like to make a motion. Basically, a motion is that we follow the staff recommendation to temporarily suspend the review of the governance chapter of the comprehensive plan and express support for the review of the goals, policies, and programs within our Palo Alto effort.
Second.
Motion by Acting Vice Chair Tanaka, second by Commissioner King. Do you wish to speak to your motion? Do you wish to speak, Commissioner King, do you wish to speak to your second?
Yes.
Go ahead.
Yes, it sounds like a great idea. As far as any feedback, I think it's so critical that we make government accessible both through this document and then through the website. So it's just easy for people to find out, oh, if I want to interact, learn about what we're doing, and then where do I provide my feedback? I mean, there are myriad commercial websites that do a good job of that for those commercial applications, and I suspect there are some for government. I'm not familiar with other government websites that help, but anyway, I'm in full favor of postponing and doing it right. I'm also would like to thank the commissioners and staff who have worked on it to date on the subcommittee, and I'm sure their work will not go for naught, but it's great to incorporate more feedback and technology as it develops. Thanks.
Commissioner Olczyk.
Okay, so I want to start by saying that if I had my way, our comprehensive plan would be called a general plan, and it would conform to the typical plans that California cities have, because I think by definition, making something accessible is making something familiar, and we don't do that by having a very unique general plan, in the sense that it's called a comprehensive plan and it's got all these. Well, now we're referring to it as a chapter, but I think we have toyed with the idea of an element. And when I started in the commission, I got assigned to this group, and I thought about this a lot over the week, but I think this is sort of a indefensible chapter. And the reason why is because everything in this chapter, I think, or 90% of what's in this chapter could be on a website, on a web page. And I thought a lot about how the process of updating this plan took forever. And I was only involved in this small sort of insignificant chapters process, and that seemed to take a long time. And I wondered, why would we want to include this sort of anecdotal discussion of access to our government in a plan that we really would like to push to relevance? We're constantly trying to keep up with the dates that we're supposed to get this thing done by, and this is not an element, not a chapter required by our state government. And so the question is it something that the city of Palo Alto somehow requires to be efficient? And I think you can't make that argument. The city manager wants to talk about his mission. Let's make a webpage where we can put our comprehensive plan, and he can have a little link to his mission. But let's not let that chapter or element, or however we want to refer to it now, be a component of something we need to deliver on a deadline. And so, am I saying that there is nothing of value in the governance chapter as it's now being referred to? No, I'm not saying that. I'm saying there's a lot of value in it. Is its place in what should be our general plan? I don't think so. And having worked on it myself, I remember we were tweaking it in an effort to make it articulate things that were not necessarily relevant to sort of the goals that the state has in particular for our general plan and for our comprehensive plan. And I just thought, could this be on a web page? Yeah, and maybe we're including it in here because we're trying to make this a full chapter. If you write, if you say this is going to be a chapter, it can't just be 2 pages, right? And so I think that some of the things that found their way into this section were included in an effort to make it more substantial and make it more relevant as it went from element to chapter. And maybe it can go from chapter to forward. But I guess my point is that we're so behind in this process that we should be cutting any fat off of it. And so my argument would be to not only support this motion and to see if the Our Palo Alto effort sort of provides us with insight on what's relevant to Palo Alto, but to also make staff make the argument to us why this is somehow relevant to the plan itself. Not necessarily that it's relevant to how we want to have the message that Palo Alto wants to make as a plan. You know, to what extent is this a part of this document? We're in a internet savvy community, and you could create a whole web site or web link to this sort of relevant information, and it would be just as accessible as it would be if it was in the digital version of this plan, which is probably how most people are going to get to it. And so the question is, why does it need to be tied to a document where we have deadlines to make, and we want to get this document to a place where we can refer to it as the 2022 general comprehensive plan, and we can say this is it, it's finished, it's not still missing 2 chapters that are sort of being amended. And then the web pages can always be updated, and they can discuss when our meetings are and who's in charge and where all the boards and commissions sit, and it can be a little civics lesson on Palo Alto, but that doesn't necessarily have to be in this plan. So I support the motion, and I just want to throw that out there because I would like to be a part of a commission that sees an updated general plan, comprehensive plan.
Thank you, Commissioner Olchek. So a couple of things about this. So first of all, I think that there is a reason for having this element from my perspective, and that is that it does provide more than simply the city manager's webpage, and that is that it's adopted by the city council, that it has a significant input into the process from the One Palo Alto process. And I think that having the One Palo Alto process incorporate governance items in that process, I think is healthy, and I think will be useful, and we'll see what comes out of that. I think that the changes that were made to this element, although they are not, the process was not completed, I think are largely beneficial to how Palo Alto governs itself, and perhaps should govern itself to the extent that it doesn't do so according to this now. So I'm going to observe a few things that we might want to address as part of this as this thing goes forward. The first is that there's an open question as the relationship between social media and the Brown Act. And I think it's sort of alluded to in the governance chapter. I think that Palo Alto, having more people here who understand about social media than perhaps a lot of other cities of our size in California, if we could provide some guidance on how to do social media that still satisfies the Brown Act, I think that would be interesting. Perhaps that means that we engage the community more, and that's part of the community engagement. Perhaps it doesn't mean that the boards and commission members and council members are actively participating, but it might be an opportunity for better input to us outside of this particular forum. So that's the first thing. The second thing is that one of the topics that came up in the director's report is California Avenue streetscape and repaving and changing that from 4 lanes to 2 lanes. And I sure hope that that process is much more efficient than the Mitchell Park Library that's a few blocks from my house. And it would be a death to a bunch of California Avenue businesses if that process were to drag on. And one thing interesting that's in this governance element or chapter is the idea that there's a citizen advisor to every department. And that might mean assistant advisors to the Public Works Department. I think that that's a worthwhile thing. And I think that the idea that each department might, maybe one thing we might add is each department be audited periodically. There have been audits of utilities and other things, but I'm not sure if there's been an appropriate audit of Public Works, and that might also be something useful to think about. In G 3.1.5, there's a comment there about East Bay, the city facilities in East Bay Shore, and in terms of their end of life and needing to redevelop those. I think that part of the discussion of redeveloping and considering the future of those sites is the potential for sea level rise and flood protection. And I think you can't, and I think of those things without considering, at least in part, flood protection. So I just sort of add the few words, the reference about tidal flood protection there. In terms of the zoning ordinance, I do think that that may be somewhat redundant with what, even though that was in the prior governance element, but that may be somewhat redundant and obsolete for the land use and other elements. So I'm wondering whether that's still needed. I think that one thing we can do more of, and is mentioned in G 2.4, is interestless. And I think we can do a lot more towards creating a plethora of interest lists in various categories that people can register on and then notify people, so that it's kind of difficult to go and say, I want to access a particular I want to find out when a particular development happens or particular things on the agenda. You have to scour the city council agenda every week. You have to scour the agendas for the ARB and the PTC and the HRB and whatever. And it'd be nice to have a better mechanism for indicating what people are really interested in. So I could see that as being an opportunity. And with that, if there's are there any other questions, comments? Any comments? Okay, with that, I'll call the motion for vote. All in favor, say aye. Aye. All opposed? That motion passes unanimously. Motion by Acting Vice Chair Tanaka, second by Commissioner King. That passes with a 4-0 vote, with Commissioner King, Acting Vice Chair Tanaka, Acting Chair Keller, and Commissioner Olchek voting present, and Commissioner Martinez and Chair Michael absent. Even though should we move on to the other agenda item, or should we take a moment break to set up? Just go on?
Yeah.
Okay, great. So the next agenda item is agenda item number 3. This is for the Planning and Transportation Commission review of a draft ordinance modifying Chapter 18.16 of the Palo Alto Municipal Code to A, address building setbacks, the build-to line standard and context-based design criteria in the CN and CS district, and B, reduce the allowable floor area on CN zone sites where dwelling units are permitted at 20 units per acre, and 2, PAMC Chapter 18.04 to adjust the definition of lot area to encourage wider sidewalks. So do we have, by the way, I don't see any comments for the members of the public, so if you want to speak on it, please submit a card, and let's start out with the staff report.
Thank you, and good evening once again. I will give a short intro and then turn it over to our chief planning official. This item is here before you tonight as a result of a couple different council actions and directions that almost went back. One of them went back almost a year ago. The first one had to do, there was a colleague's memo related to sidewalk width on El Camino that had somewhat of a more expanded definition of what they would like to do, but the main point of it was to take a look and increase sidewalk widths along the El Camino. The second part of it, and you'll see all the separate motions in here, another more immediate need is related to the housing element in places that were on our properties that were on our housing inventory list. We took those from a 15 unit per acre to a 20 unit per acre, and that was approved as part of our housing element process. After that approval, the council asked us to look into reducing the FAR on those sites. As we were going through this process, we realized that there was a number of other things that could be done to make the code more sound, and we included some of those. For tonight's action, though, staff, and Amy will go more into this, would like the end result to be a planning commission recommendation on at least, and specifically focused on, the El Camino aspects of it and the FAR reduction aspects of it. And what we would propose is that later this month, potentially later this month or in late March, we have a joint meeting with the ARB. The ARB also reviewed these ordinances and had a number of good suggestions. They also suggested that the Planning Commission and the ARB meet So staff concurs that's a good idea. However, given the council direction related to the El Camino sidewalk and as well as the FAR reduction, we would like to see some type of recommendation specifically related to that to the council tonight to come out of the commission, and then we could later talk about other nuances of the code at a later meeting. So I'll turn it over to our Chief Planning Official.
Great, thank you. Amy French, Chief Planning Official. So you read the agenda, which correctly notes that it's Chapter 1816 of the Palo Alto Municipal Code that we are going to address tonight, as well as Chapter 1804. There was a bit of a typo on the attached ordinance, Attachment A. Just wanted to call that out. So what Aaron covered, what the council had done recently about the housing. So that's covered, the modest reduction of FAR on those CN zoned housing sites. And there are, approximately 32 of those sites along El Camino Real. As far as the sidewalk width, the council's concern was how buildings address the street. Some of that is dealt with already in the context-based design criteria, which was derived from the El Camino Real design guidelines. So that is actually in the zoning code, once again. The vision that was being looked at with the Grand Boulevard was an 8-foot walking zone, a 6-foot amenity zone, and then they had an additional 4 feet as a spill-out area. So what that would have required, an 18-foot sidewalk, would be a 10-foot setback on the private property, the building to the right-of-way. And so that's the question that the ARB has been wrestling with, looking at the various options there. And then, of course, at some point, revising the South El Camino Real guidelines to be consistent with the zoning that we're kind of trying to focus on here, is to get the low-hanging fruit, which we think is, the sidewalk width, the build-to line, kind of address that head-on. The council had noted something about other thoroughfares in their motion back in April. And, those other thoroughfares are not CN and CS zoned, with the exception of Charleston Road. So we believe that further study is needed and perhaps outreach. Those other streets have some different characters than El Camino Real and different. It's not necessarily a regional roadway, as is the El Camino Real. So again, we're focused on the CN and CS districts. The Chapter 1816 does also have the CC district, which is a zone that is also on California Avenue. But again, we're pretty much focused on sidewalk width on El Camino and the addressing the building setback, as well as the definition of lot area. And the reason we have the definition of lot area is because lot area has an impact on how much floor area can be in a building. Okay, so we just are focused on that tonight as well, and that's in 1804 in the attachment. So looking at the slide I have up there, the floor area, the proposal is a 0.8 FAR for mixed use, and that would be 0.4 residential and 0.4 non-residential. Those are for those housing sites where they propose a greater than 15 development units per acre. Okay, so then the sidewalk and building frontage. The ordinance, our goals here are, again, increase the El Camino Real sidewalk width beyond what's required now, which is 12 feet. 12 feet is currently required, which requires the property owners to set their buildings back and provide sidewalk basically 4 feet onto their private property. That's what currently is required. We wanted to clarify or modify the build-to line requirements. This is the requirement that says you have to put 50% of your building right there at the zero setback or whatever setback to make that 12-foot effective sidewalk. And so again, we feel that we will have additional study at a later date for other thoroughfares, besides the El Camino Real. That El Camino Real is really the focus. It's where we started, and the council did acknowledge that that's the focus. At this time. The, again, effective sidewalk width is not a definition in Chapter 1804. It is described and illustrated in the context-based guidelines in Chapter 1816. But one concept is to, actually formally put a definition of that would say, it's from curb to building face, and it's inclusive of plantings and furnishings. That's what we have been dealing with as effective sidewalk width. The other definition change is lot area. Again, it's to say that if they do dedicate their private property, and we're talking about more than 4 feet at this point, that area would not be deducted from what they're calling lot area for the purpose of calculating how much floor area they can put on their site at whatever floor. Okay, and then one question is, is that something, the lot area, that we want to consider broadening to other zones beyond the CS and CN, so CD. In other words, we have some projects downtown where they did make a wider, a setback, and that is walkable. Perhaps that lot area definition, we can use that in beyond El Camino. The next one, the build to standard. It's the build to line. And, there was discussion about possibly eliminating that standard. But what we want to still preserve is some kind of presentation to the street that doesn't involve, too much back and forth from building to building with those setbacks. So, what is the appropriate setback? This is what the ARB has been wrestling with. Is it worth having a build to line and having exceptions, such as we've been seeing coming through the process, exceptions for allowing greater setback? Or, are there other things we can do? So there are special factors such as land use and lot size that the ARB, was looking at. When you have a very large parcel, you're going to have a longer, building wall, and so that's a consideration. So then the concept of, do you do a build to line standard or do you do an average setback? This is a concept. So one phrase that could be considered is, where there's, let's say on El Camino, put it out there, 15 feet. If you do a 15-foot effective sidewalk on El Camino, then that would mean you're going to place the building front wall at 7 feet from the front property line. 7 feet of private property dedicated, plus the 8 feet right of way that's currently there. The other concept is, again, going back to that build to line and what are we trying to achieve? Consideration of a maximum setback. Are you going to have building setback farther than 10 feet from the front? That would be an 18-foot. There are places along El Camino that make sense to have a city center, a kind of a Cafe Baroni effect with plazas, et cetera. So, how far back do we want that to go? And, what's the concern about placing it farther forward? One of those concerns is parking. Well, there's a context-based guideline that says don't put parking in front of the building. So we've already got that in our zoning code to say don't put parking in front of the building, but there are circumstances where, that might be a place that it has to go from a feasibility standpoint. But in any case, we could consider adding to the tables, table 3 and 4, something about parking is prohibited in the front yard or, something along those lines, like it says in the context-based design criteria, which is what I have up next. The concept of the upper floors, currently the context-based design criteria says the upper floor shall be set back. Well, there might be a place where we want to have the first floor set back to allow for the walking, and then the upper floor set forward, the colonnade effect, the arcade. So we might want to have some flexibility for that. And I have an example here in Redwood City. The measurement from the curb to the columns is 9 in some places to the white columns, and then it goes back a bit farther in the distance there to 10 or 11 feet. And then the front wall of the building beyond that arcade is about, I believe, 19 feet. So there's some opportunities there to consider some flexibility. Okay, so this is then the context-based criteria that talks about, we had started to approach it as a range. When we discussed the range with the ARB, their recommendation came back as a 9-foot to 15-foot range. Okay, so if we're thinking of 9 feet on thoroughfares elsewhere, what we have is 8 feet required now, other than El Camino and the CNCS, and we have a 12-foot required now. ARB is recommending take that to 15, rather than going to 18 feet as in the Grand Boulevard. Okay, and then the other concept is an average building frontage. So thinking about you have this 7 feet. If you're going to do 15 feet, then the 7 feet from the property line to the building, could that be an average setback rather than 50% of the building has to be at the 7 feet? You might look at it that way. One thing I should say about 15 feet, it was discussed at the joint meeting back in July with ARB and Planning Commission. Has been employed elsewhere. One place is the rail corridor study. Another place is the SOFA RT zone. That's near downtown here. And then also Menlo Park has a 15-foot standard that they've implemented with their specific plan. So that concludes the presentation. There's some pocket slides in the back if anyone needs the additional information. We got some other images. Maybe I'll roll to those and let those hang around. Again, here's the Grand Boulevard. And here's a concept for 15 feet that our consultant had generated some time before. Now, Randy Pop is here to present as well the ARB's discussion. And we're here for questions.
Do you want to add anything to that, board member, ARB board member Pop?
Good evening, Randy Pop here representing the Architectural Review Board. First, I want to thank the council for pushing this issue. I think it's important for us to be discussing this, and Amy, you've done a great job, you and your staff, articulating the specifics of our discussion here. I do want to reiterate a couple of the major points. First of all, in terms of the width, that 9 to 15 foot dimension that Amy has illustrated for you is really a range. We really like to see that as a range. And the goal here would be to allow flexibility and to promote a varied character in the environment along the El Camino corridor. This idea that 15 feet is, nervous about creating a number, right? A very specific number that everybody feels like they need to hold to. Each project is different. We looked at the entire length of El Camino. We studied this, different lot sizes, different lot dimensions. There is no one-size-fits-all solution here. And so it's important to have some flexibility for design. And this idea that at very wide lots, the Menlo Center is a great example of this in Menlo Park, where Cafe Baroni exists, that places really can recess to a greater degree and still promote, fantastic life right at the street front with a building that still has some nice presence. And with that, we think that it is critical that we engage a consultant to develop some diagrammatic examples of suggestions in a number of different situations for different lot sizes, different usable widths, placement of accessories and plantings, etc., so that people really understand clearly the intent and then can launch from that point. In regard to the lot area, where we are suggesting that the sidewalk width be extended over private property, it's important to understand that the ARB felt strongly that there be no reduction in FAR, but we did not see this in any way as an incentive. We felt that this was really just maintaining the rights of people. And again, what we're trying to encourage here is the right kind of redevelopment and get people to take down the buildings that are unpleasant and don't meet the standards that we're trying to achieve, and encourage the right kind of growth. So we're not suggesting adding area, but we certainly are suggesting that there be a way to maintain all of the rights that you would have, even with the extension of the sidewalk width. In regard to the build-to line, and I think the big question here is why a variance in the build-to line, and I don't mean variance in the wrong sense of the word here, variability in the build-to line. This is what the ARB is for. We can look at each individual project. We can look at them as they come. We can study this. We can evaluate whether people have got the right amount of building frontage close, mass far away, tiered back, whatever the solutions are, but on a project-by-project basis. And again, the idea here is to promote some varied character along this corridor. The last thing that I want to just quickly address is the inclusion of a discussion about trees. And one of the things that is very clear in my discussions with Dave Doctor, and certainly as you drive along El Camino, you can see this. The location of trees relative to a curb is really critical, particularly with respect for the building's placement in terms of the canopy. And if the building is too close to the trees, the canopy cannot grow properly. It gets misshapen. If we hold the buildings back in the right way, at the right places, get the right rhythm, it really can be an elegant boulevard, and it will really help to further this concept of something magnificent as you cruise through Palo Alto. Again, this is something that we all felt should very much be a part of the diagrams the consultant develops. Quick summary, if you have other questions, I'll hang around for a little while here. If there's any other questions I can answer. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And we have one speaker for the public. Since we don't have many people here, you'll have 5 minutes.
Herb Borak.
Good evening, Acting Chair Keller and Commissioners. On the question of the sidewalk setback first, I mean, I believe that the objections that we've heard from the community about a number of projects are primarily due to the amount of floor area and the decisions that the council has made to allow that amount of floor area to fit on a site. And the real problem that needs to be addressed are the decisions that the council's made both in adopting planned community zone districts in some cases, and in the past, the problem of changing what can be built on a site in a particular zone district, both in terms of its allowable floor area and its setbacks. 15 years ago, staff reports from the planning division had histories of how we got to where we are. But the previous city manager felt that that shouldn't be there. All you should get essentially would be a sentence saying what would happen if you voted yes or you voted no on a proposal. And that's essentially the culture that we have now. In terms of trying to find the proper setback on a state highway, El Camino, as if it's going to be a place that people are going to be spending lots of time walking along, I don't think reflects either what El Camino Real is now or what it can possibly be in the future. There's also a question, which was discussed at the Architecture Review Board, of the difference between a public sidewalk and a wide area that can be appropriated for private use by businesses. A number of years ago, at the start of a council vacation, the administrator in the planning department, whose skills are in utility resource planning, that's where he works now, sent out an interpretation that was signed by the then director of planning, Mr. Emsley, that said they've changed their interpretation. People can put tables and chairs on the sidewalks on University Avenue essentially at will, completely ignoring the past policy that if they are increasing the number of seating that they have, then that has to be reflected in payments for parking. And so now we don't have as wide a sidewalk we used to have on University Avenue because they're occupied by tables and chairs. So a number of members of the Architectural Review Board, when they were talking about a 9 to 15-foot sidewalk, were talking about a 9 to 15-foot sidewalk so that a portion of it could be occupied by the private business. You know, it's called a sidewalk. And as Councilmember Rosenbaum indicated, when people were talking about the sit-lie ordinance, it's not a place for sitting and lying, it's a place for walking. It's not a place for business to take place, it's a place for people to walk. If you really want a wide enough sidewalk to get that kind of feel where people would want to walk on it. In regard to the other part of the proposal from Council on the amount of floor area for sites on El Camino that are reflected in the housing inventory sites for the requirement for meeting the state's housing density bonus law. Under that law, because of the size of the city that we have to have sites with a minimum density of 20 units per acre, and we have some sites that are 15 units maximum. And so we had to agree to make those 20. But when that proposal was approved by the Department of Housing and Community Development in California, it was based upon what the current zoning regulations are for those sites. So there are two things. One, I don't know if you can do it at all. The second is maybe the only way you can do it is if you reduce the floor area ratio for everything in those zone districts, so that when a developer comes in and wants to take advantage of the incentives and concessions that include increasing the floor area by a certain amount, I believe the council finally agreed the maximum was 25%, they get the ability to use that bonus. But by saying first that we get approval from the state to get a certain sites approved for a bonus, and then say we're taking away the base, I'm not sure that that's even legal. Thank you.
Thank you. So let's bring that back to the commission. Who wants to lead us off? Commissioner Olchak.
I think this is a extraordinary idea, the Grand Boulevard. It's a vision that I have a hard time visualizing, because maybe the fact that I grew up in this neighborhood, I grew up in Los Altos, maybe just having grown up off the El Camino, it's just hard to imagine it any other way that it is. And when I think of El Camino, it does not bring any sort of warm and fuzzy feelings. It's just so the notion that the city is sort of considering something much more visionary, I think, is awesome. And I have a lot of faith in the direction that we have received from the ARB, being specialists in the field of architecture. With regard to sort of providing the flexibility of a range of setbacks that allow, that hopefully will help us avoid something that's too monotonous. It's hard to imagine, what's the hotel, is it the Plaza, the Crown Plaza, or on El Camino? It's sort of hard to imagine. You see that hotel, it's so set back, and there's this huge parking lot. Last time we had this meeting, we talked about how a lot of sites aren't even that deep. So if we create this setback, what are we doing to these lots? Are we destroying their sort of feasibility because we're making them too narrow or whatever? I guess too shallow. Thank you. You can see that without a very well articulated plan, there's not ever going to be a visionary result for the Grand Boulevard. You're going to have hotels with 400 car parking lots, and that they're just distant. I don't know what do we have a name for the site on the corner of Page Mill that has like a movie theater in it, and it's a bunch of office buildings?
It's Palo Alto Square, 3000 El Camino.
Okay, so Palo Alto Square is another sort of site that just seems so inaccessible from the street. And then right across the street is sort of a retail front. It just seems so opposite. I would hope that this boulevard plan would articulate an opportunity for people to really create a uniform sort of feel on the El Camino that encouraged walkable retail. I mean, it's hard to imagine, but who knows? El Camino could be like a monorail one day, and we're all walking off of it, right? And it's the only place to put that monorail, and so everybody's sort of accessing it. We have no idea, but it's certainly it's suffered from, I guess, a lack of vision. And so I like the idea of creating a framework that is both suggestive but flexible. You know, it's hard to imagine that we know the right answer right now for the whole street. And so I like the idea of there being sort of a range of setbacks that sort of create maybe spaces where you can walk underneath an overhang. That actually seems like an excellent idea. The arcade, you see a lot of that in sort of major metropolitan, no, I shouldn't say major, in metropolitan areas in Europe where they sort of focus a lot more on the notion of walkable boulevards, if you will. And we sort of don't, we have them as main streets, but they seem to have them everywhere. So this sort of notion that you have the arcade as one option and then the plaza as another potential option, I think that's great. And so I think having a Cafe Baroni style, what did you call it? The Palo Alto Plaza, that's what that property's called?
The Palo Alto Square is the movie theater, yeah.
So I know this, so it's, I mean, just this notion of having plazas next to arcades sounds fantastic because it's a diversity of approaches. And so, especially since this is a hard to envision vision, I would support the idea that we created a flexibility in the approach, but still articulated this notion of, yeah, this needs to be walkable. And there needs to be much more space than we normally require in our building code, you know, on the sidewalk. I think that's an interesting idea, the idea of sort of if the FAR, the area you're taking away, you're going to allow somewhere else in the building. I'm a really strong advocate for height. I think we have a very negative view about it. And, you know, there are limitations that sort of guide us in our approach to, you know, height, whether it's our current restrictions or daylight planes. And I think we should explore flexibility there too on the Grand Boulevard, especially since you're talking about taking something away. So I like this.
Why don't we do Commissioner King next?
Okay, thank you for the report. So I guess I'm trying to, the agenda item seems there's a little bit of a license to ramble in here, and maybe that's what we're supposed to do. There's not a goal. We're not supposed to try and we're not trying to draft any wording, ordinance. We're just supposed to give you feedback. Is that our goal? And fairly limited to El Camino Real.
Yeah, feedback is great. We do have a draft ordinance that could be tweaked if there was, you know, some kind of straw poll, you know, to provide guidance for the next step that we could come back with. Yeah.
Okay, so at a minimum, though, you're just looking for how our response to the items that you've delineated here, restricted to El Camino Real.
And I would like to add that if you did have a recommendation that you would like to make related to the El Camino specifically, and a recommendation related to the FAR reductions, we would like to, because we would at least like to take that portion of the ordinance onto the council as soon as possible, and then bring back the other points for further discussion with the Planning Commission as well as the ARB.
Okay, and it seems, but just in my mind, a bit of a challenge. One, we're not a design, you know, as Commissioner Alchek mentioned, it really ARB are the ones who are the design experts. So if you said, "Oh, Carl, please write us up an ordinance right now," I would feel that is over my head. So I'm going to limit myself. Now, Commissioner Keller, he might be the man to do that.
Much more comfortable.
But in any event, so I'm going to limit myself to just addressing and asking some questions. So, and one I will, I'll just go right to kind of down on the list. One of the things that is an interesting thing about I totally understand and in concept agree with the fact that if the building developers agree to widen the sidewalk at the expense of their lot line or the setting back their building, and therefore they're giving up space there, that we would allow the same FAR. However, on the other hand, as you do see, then if that same, once the building is developed and now the lessee is in there, and then they say, oh, and we want to put tables out here, then they're effectively getting an enhancement. I know there's somewhere in here, I couldn't find the wording again, but that we're not looking to give them an enhancement, but in fact, by default or in practice, it could be an enhancement. That then they're going to take back that floor area, so they'll both get the FAR created by maintaining the lot size, and then they're going to take back that sidewalk area for commercial use. And so maybe you could, if you want to address that now, one, how is that, am I missing something? It seems, and then two, if in fact that is a risk, how do we handle that? Do we say, oh, well, we're going to count, obviously, exterior space, well, actually, I'm not a restaurateur, I don't know. Is it more favorable per square foot? Do they make more money by having outdoor seating for that amount of space? Or is it less favorable? And so then is there a way we use a adder or a subtractor for that space outside relative to the interior FAR?
So I wouldn't even take, I mean, my opinion, where we wouldn't even take it to the financial analysis standpoint, I think is, do we want outdoor dining as something that we want as a community? As part, you know, that we incorporate into our land use decisions, or is it something that we don't want? I think outdoor dining in a climate like Palo Alto is a pretty popular thing. And even though restaurants might be making additional revenue related to that, it seems to be a pretty popular amenity for Palo Alto residents as well as people who visit Palo Alto to eat. So I think in general, if our policies encourage that, that would be consistent with what people have wanted to see in the past.
Well, okay, so there are the commercial profitability, numbers aspects, but then there's also okay, well, every one of those tables is going to, when we're talking about transit, parking is an issue, every one of those tables that's seated outside in an area that we're calling, that we're adding to the base FAR is another car that's coming in and parking. I mean, it's also dollars to the community, but that, we obviously don't have unlimited, give people unlimited FAR, so it seems to me that you're going to both add people parking there, and then the FAR that's being retained for the building itself, the interior portion, that's filled with people, and so you're really adding more load to the transportation systems. At a minimum, again, I'm not sure about your point, the fairness of, it's something we want to encourage, but you are giving a bonus to the developer relative to having lot lines at the street where they currently are, or the sidewalk, and you're then adding demand, people traffic, which in general is car traffic. Am I missing something?
No, I think you have some good points there. I think the overall traffic impact of tables, I guess it depends how big it is, right? I mean, if you have a few tables out there, there's not going to be a huge traffic impact. If you have something like Cafe Baroni where there's dozens of tables out there, there's going to be a larger traffic impact. But I think that's something that we'd probably have to look at independently, as part of the overall development approval process. But I hear you, what your point is on that.
Okay. Oh, yeah,
can I add something as well? So if it's truly right-of-way, dedicated right-of-way, there's a process that requires an encroachment permit. We also have the ARB process for looking at the style of tables they're putting out there, make sure they're up to city standards. The other thing is, we find a lot of times the seasonal, when it's sunny, folks may be sitting outside. In the winter or rainy, they go inside. So it's sometimes of year you'll have seating in both areas. Maybe it's a really popular restaurant, but we've been having this 12-foot setback for years now, where they're dedicated. They have a 4-foot additional sidewalk, and so we haven't found it to be a problem with the 4 feet. So an additional 3 feet on top of that, I don't know that we haven't seen a lot of seating. We'd like to see seating. I think it's in our context-based guideline that's an encouraged to enliven the street, vibrant retail. That's part of the vibrant retail.
Got it. Okay. Well, I would just say I have concern that then because basically we're saying thank you for the sidewalk, for increasing the sidewalk for the benefit of the public. And so for that, we're allowing you to maintain your FAR in the interior spaces, and then they're saying, oh, that's great. And then they're taking that sidewalk back for their private uses. And it may be great and vibrant, but I'm seeing that I have concern about that.
The other thing about that, we wouldn't have permanent covering over that, so it would not be considered lot area or, lot coverage or floor area ratio.
Well, and that's my exact point.
Right?
That is that they use it for commercial generation of revenues. It really is a public space, just as we've had this issue with some of the PCs. Where they are public spaces, but during lunch hour or when they want to seat people for dinner, they're not public spaces. And so I just have a real concern over that. So we can move on. We can discuss it as it moves down the road, but that is a concern on my part.
The one thing I would add to that is what cities typically do. It's the cities all up and down the peninsula, cities all over the country, is they would issue some type of encroachment permit to go within that area. If it was considered public right-of-way, then there would be some charge associated with that encroachment permit, as well as conditions or performance standards that restaurant would have to make. So that's kind of the typical industry standard of the way that you do it. I mean, obviously we see sidewalk dining everywhere in the country, and that's a typical process that someone would go through.
Okay, but I will add that the natives with the pitchforks and torches are on parking and growth, appropriate or not, that are not liking growth, is we are really we're growing where currently the FARs do not support growing. And as a sidelight, and I know I should be out of time here, I'm stuck on one subject, is, if we really believe we're this green city and that we want to support environmental stewardship, all those outdoor restaurants, you could not have a cartoon more showing global warming than having those heaters that just heat the outdoors. I mean, that is the definition of global warming, having a heater trying to heat the outdoor ambient environment. And so, I'm not going to tackle that, but I do have concerns. I don't know if anybody's done any math on, hey, just how much, what is that the equivalent of miles driven, all our outdoor restaurants, which is becoming more and more common. So.
Can I, before you address that, I think a board member, Pop, wanted to address some of your issues with respect to the issue of setback.
Yeah, thank you so much for the opportunity. Commissioner King, I think the thing that I wanted to just mention, first of all, I think your points are great about, FAR and what that means to a developer. I don't want to get into the aspects of the finances of it. The Architectural Review Board is about character and quality. And in regard to that, what I would describe is that this 15-foot goal for setback is really an aesthetic goal. And it can incorporate objects such as tables and chairs and all these things. But our intent really is to get the building face, the mass of the building, away from the street in a way that gives you a visual sense of a certain width as you move down this boulevard. And having street life, and having chairs and tables, and having whatever might occur out there is part and parcel of what will make that character and the interest really vibrant in that street. And so I would certainly leave it to you guys to figure out how we manage the financial benefits of what that might be and what a developer might get from that. But I can tell you that the Architectural Review Board is very much in favor of maintaining a certain width that's very usable, but that additional couple of feet, few feet, whatever it might be, that might give space for tables and chairs could be terrifically valuable to the public overall in terms of how that space feels. Thank you.
Thank you. Commissioner King, you want to continue? And you want to address the question that you had already?
Yeah, so I guess my feedback would be, I would say that you don't give them the extra. Now I see it, I say, well, you get to retain rights to that strip of sidewalk for your commercial uses with your building, but you do not get the but it counts as FAR, that you're not, it's still, because it is useful space for the building. So, yeah, I don't know exactly how that would translate into the draft, but I don't think, I see it that they're getting an enhancement when we may not want that.
I would weigh in on that. Just land use could be a critical piece of this, is a critical piece. You know, we're just looking at it as if it's all restaurants, but you know, when you have a 15-foot requirement, let's say, and you have an office there, which is allowed in the CS zone. If you have, you know, personal services, something like that, you're not going to have people going out and drying their, you know, pedicure in front, you know, in the chairs.
Good. So in that case, I would say that it's tied to whether the public has full 24-hour access, subject to curfews or whatever there are, 24-hour access to that space, the additional sidewalk space, or whether the business has the right to use that for their commercial purposes. That's okay. Thanks. And then I'll just take another minute just to flip through the other items. So in general, I think it's great to have the flexibility. You know, obviously we've all seen the buildings people don't like when they're the unintended consequences of this, the buildings moved up to the front has happened. So I'm fully in favor of the general concept. And then what are you trying regarding then the floor area ratio change? So you've presented some things that look like dropping it to 0.8. What do you want from us? I mean, to me, that sounds like a good idea. I think the general idea is we're allowing more units, but then we want them to be smaller residential units is the goal. And so I in general am in favor of that.
That's correct. So I mean, that's what we would like your motion to move forward, that portion of it.
Okay.
Eventually, not right now.
Understood. Okay. Okay, well then I'm done, and we'll look forward to someone else who might want to craft the motion. Thank you.
Acting Vice Chair Tanaka.
Okay, so in general, I like what I see here. I think supporting the Grand Boulevard makes a lot of sense, and I think in general, I think this is headed in the right direction. So I think I heard that there are 32 projects affected, or could be affected. Or maybe you could clarify.
That's with the CN housing sites FAR reduction. That's specific to that piece of the ordinance. The others, you know, there's many more sites on El Camino that would be affected by the sidewalk width and build-to line.
Okay. And will all of these projects that will be affected, are they going to be notified, or will the property owners, like, you know, be alerted as to some of these things going on?
So, you know, I'll let Assistant Director Ackman address the housing element piece with the floor area. I know that, you know, it was stated in the council meeting that that was a direction. And I imagine that those housing sites, property owners were very much aware of that process.
We'll notify any of those property owners before the council meeting.
Okay, that makes sense. I think it's important that they know. Okay, and then my other point here is I think there's many ways to accomplish what's being done here. I've heard Acting Chair Keller also mentioned that perhaps, you know, one way of doing this also is to say, well, there's no parking in front, and so I guess I'm just thinking about the mechanics and what is the best ways in terms of mechanics to implement something like this. I was wondering if staff had some thoughts about the pros and cons of different ways of accomplishing this. This
sure.
goal.
Yeah, so in the context-based guidelines currently, there's a statement about this. It's called, one of the guidelines, I think it's guideline 6, is parking design. And so this is the place where, you know, and it's in the zoning code, so it is pretty much a requirement. It's a context-based design criteria, and I'm looking for the quote from there. But it is a legitimate way of providing direction to applicants to state that we don't have parking lots in front of buildings per the context-based guidelines. We do provide these guidelines to applicants prior to them coming into the process. You know, it could be strengthened with an out-and-out prohibition in the tables 3 and 4. if that's a desired, to make it crystal clear. But the context-based guidelines do provide some flexibility on this point. It talks about feasibility. There might be a situation where, there might be a situation with a historic building or something where, it's an existing parking lot out front. I don't know. There's some potential need for flexibility there. But the majority of cases, especially a new building, we would want to, look to have the parking in the rear. And we've done that with all of the projects that have come through since the adoption of the El Camino Real guidelines, is to have that condition.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. So, first of all, thank you to the council for referring this to us, and to the staff and to the ARB for having analyzed the issues, and also for our joint meeting where we discussed these and were able to consider the issues. So the first thing I'm going to talk about is the FAR. So firstly, it does make sense from my point of view not to penalize the developers who have essentially had that land and then they're giving that setback to the city, that their land area for the purposes of counting FAR should include the area that they're dedicating to the city. And I think that is a reasonable general rule, because I think that there have been developers who have avoided dedicating additional land to the city for that. For example, some of the special setbacks in the sides of streets in downtown because of the loss of FAR, and I think that is a fairness issue. But there's a wrinkle here that hasn't come up. And that wrinkle has to do with arcades. So when you have a setback and then you have an arcade, which means you sort of come out from that setback further forward, and then what happens is they decide to put tables under that arcade, you lose a lot of the visual sense of the space because it's taken up by people and tables. Now, that may be a good thing, it may be a bad thing, but in some sense, what it addresses is the issue of, if you have arcades and you are contemplating the ability of having tables, the issue of how open that is and how high the arcade is. Is it a one-story arcade? Is it a two-story arcade, depending on the height of the building? That may appropriately address the issue and still give that open feel, even if there are tables in there. But essentially, if you have tables in there, the effective sidewalk width, the logical effective sidewalk width, is somewhat narrowed with an arcade and table. So it's that interaction that I'm mostly concerned about.
I'll jump in there with the Redwood City example. I think that's what the ARB was commenting on, that if you have a range on El Camino of 9 to 15 feet, that's a perfect example. You still have the 9-foot walkable between the curb and the columns, and then you have another, in that case, that was 19 feet back to the front wall under that arcade. So, there could be reasons to have less than 15 feet, let's say, if it's a situation such as the arcade.
Yeah, particularly if the arcade is sufficiently open and attractive and has a high enough or whatever, so that you actually have the visual thing there. Okay, the next thing I'm going to on a roll here with respect to floor area ratio. I think that there was something ironic about reducing the floor area ratio for CN zone for 20 dwelling units per acre is allowed, and not reducing it for the situation when 15 dwelling units per acre is allowed. And it seems to me, in general, that the limit to how many dwelling units you can put in is primarily FAR and parking. And that's the first thing. And the second thing about that is that when you have the increase for the housing bonus density law, that will affect situations that are in the housing inventory element as well as not in the housing inventory list. And so it seems to me that in either case there should be a reduction. So I would be in favor of applying the CN reduction across the board and having that, when it comes back to us, noticed appropriately so that that change can be made. Particularly since the bonus applies on either case. So I'm not sure that the bonus only applies in El Camino 20. I'm wondering if staff has any comment about that?
I mean, at this point, I would say we would stick to our original recommendation because that was the direction given to us by the City Council. I think it makes sense because there was additional incentive given for the housing inventory, and we needed something to balance that. We haven't analyzed what the potential impact could be for a more widespread look at that, and we'd probably want additional community outreach before it happens, as well as additional council input. But right now, we're focused on what the council direction was, and that was specifically related to the houses, the properties in the housing inventory.
I think that's fair enough. I just want to point that out. And when this comes back to us, we could also look at the CS zone. And when we look at the CS zone for hotels, we might also want to incorporate some degree of retail in hotels. I think that some of the hotels that have been along El Camino, you get a hotel, you get no retail. It sort of doesn't enliven the street in that way. And so if we had, for example, if the hotel had a restaurant and that restaurant was open to the public, that'd be fine. But if the hotel doesn't have a restaurant and there's nothing open to the public, it sort of deadens the street. So I think that that's not helpful. So then there was a discussion about the nature of the setback on El Camino Real. And so I'm going to suggest, first of all, the idea that we don't have a build-to requirement, and that instead there's explicit limit that you have no parking in front. So we have setback requirement I'm going to talk about in a moment. But in terms of the build-to requirement, essentially, if there's no parking allowed there, if the developer wants to set it back further, and the developer has a reason for doing that, it's then let them. Economically, the desire for most developers is to push it as far to the street as they can, because of how they can fit the massing in the building. So essentially, if the developer has a good reason for not having the building come up to the sidewalk, we shouldn't require a DEE or we shouldn't require a variance. It's a reasonable thing, and I think that it actually adds visual interest to El Camino to actually have more varying frontage, and it allows for planting of more trees and things like that. So I would suggest eliminating the build-to line and replacing that with an explicit prohibition against parking in the front of the building. And I'm wondering if staff can comment on it, and then ARB member Pop can comment on that, and then if we can have a straw poll among the commission.
Yeah, I'm happy to. I mean, I conceptually, the concept, I understand it. There may be a case where we want to consider, a maximum setback. I don't know. It hasn't been fully studied that way, but I understand the concept. And our ARB member is here, and I know you've said perhaps there's a reason to weigh in.
Yeah, tough discussion, right? Whether we should force someone to meet a certain criteria when there's such a wide variety of choices and lots and options for what people might build, and it's hard to predict what would be right and would fit all of these different sites. But again, I think this is an area where the Architectural Review Board comes into play, and it's our role to help assess whether buildings are placed properly on the site. Is the setback enough? Is it too much? Is the building massing appropriate? The thing we want to avoid is this concept of missing teeth, right? That as you drive down El Camino, there's some big gap that just looks wrong. I want to be clear in saying that, and I'll carefully use this as an example, right? This is not us, and it's not what we want to be, but if you look at something like the Champs-Élysées, right, where there's this incredibly consistent pattern of building after building after building, and these beautiful wide sidewalks, and people strolling and dining happening outside. It's elegant and it's wonderful. but it's not what we're trying to achieve here, right? There are these visions for what grand boulevards might be. And again, I want to really reinforce the ARB's position that variation and really high quality character are what we're trying to achieve here. And the variability that might be present in treating one site differently than another, again, this idea that we should get a consultant to come and put together some concepts for different types of sites so that people have an idea about what we are looking for, so that when they come forward with a proposal, they have the best chance of success and they've got the best guidance that we can give them. And then they bring it forward and we have a discussion. And we take these one at a time as they come.
So to operationalize the question from my point of view, does the build to line help you or hinder you? And if we got rid of that and replaced it with a parking, no parking in front requirement, which I assume people would do anyway, they wouldn't put parking in the front. And the reason I'm doing that is so that you don't set the building back and put parking in the front. So that has to go with it. I'm wondering whether your normal process of having a good design review, whether that would be satisfactory in that environment.
So there are 5 of us. I would tell you my opinion, since I don't have all the others here to speak for it. And feel free to chime in if you recall something from the hearing that I don't remember clearly. But I think they're 2 separate issues. And requiring no parking in the front setback can be one issue. And a second issue can be whether or not we have a build-to line. And I welcome your discussion and your thoughts about that. But again, my opinion here is that it's important to try to describe some goals and to promote variation within the guidelines so that people can come forward with the best possible concept for each individual site. And completely eliminating the guidelines makes for a tough discussion, in my opinion. It makes it hard for us to talk to an applicant about what is or is not appropriate. Design is subjective. And even within the board, we have agreement and disagreement about these types of things. I think that the expectation I have is that there is some range of appropriate build-to line, and whether it's an average or whether it's some forward, some backward, a certain number that we try and give, I'd rather the DEEs or these other devices that people come forward for an exception are really the exception and not the rule. What's happening now is that every project that we're looking at is coming forward with some type of a DEE because it just doesn't work. Perhaps someone from staff can remind me, 3159 El Camino?
Yes.
Is the Equinox site?
Yes.
I mean, this is, I want to just bring this forward as a what I consider to be a very nice example of thoughtful design and careful planning and a successful project moving through the process. 3159 El Camino is the Equinox site, and they have done a very elegant job of holding the building back, creating a portion that approaches the street so it holds the street edge nicely, that there's an arcade area where it's appropriate and where the uses really encourage that within the buildings. I think there's an idea that there's a restaurant in there, and there are spaces that do all these things, but there are nodes along El Camino where these types of things are appropriate, and there are places where you just wouldn't want to have that. And so giving some guidance about what is appropriate is very valid, in my opinion.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Does any staff also want to weigh in?
Well, I was just checking my notes about what was said at the ARB to confirm what Randy said. So the ARB did kind of discuss either deleting the build-to requirement and just allowing the ARB to determine the appropriate setback and percentage at the front in each case, because we have different land uses and large and small lots, so to acknowledge that and make that a valid choice, or retain the build-to line requirement and then have reasons why exceptions to that are allowed. Again, different land uses. If you have a hotel, for instance, or residential, then, that's a reason to not come forward and to have more landscaping between the sidewalk and the building, or a building that has less articulation because of the use, less retail display windows. That building could go back further. So you could get a little bit more specific if you wanted, or again, you could just leave it up to the ARB to make that judgment on a case-to-case basis. I think the main thing is the missing teeth and making sure that we're still holding that building line and not having to go through a DEE per se each time somebody wants to do something less than, right at the setback line, or for a percentage of the building frontage. I mean, that's where we get into some trouble.
So perhaps, when would this come back to us? And would there be an opportunity for the ARB to have a meeting in between?
Yes.
So that they could review and sort of add feedback to this potential?
We are looking at March 26th, if that works for all, to have some kind of if a joint meeting is desired. Now I know Aaron had said, and our director is asking that we kind of move forward and maybe some other things get talked about, but that's kind of in reserve as a joint meeting if needed. The ARB is planning on meeting next on March 20th to hopefully bring back what the Planning and Transportation Commission had to say about it and have another discussion at the ARB on March 20th.
Well, I don't want to push this too far forward, but I'm wondering if the ARB meets on March 20th, would there be an opportunity from that to incorporate things for our meeting on the 26th?
Sure. I mean, the noticing process is, still in the same chapters. We tweak things certain ways. I think the only thing that's, if there's something that comes up at the ARB on the 20th and we need to do some sort of outreach, we might want to get some cards out and notices, for something like that.
And also, this is separate from the issue of what the setback would be, because in other words, there's a setback and the build-to line, so I'm suggesting replacing the build-to line by parking in front of the building. So I'm wondering, any commissioner want to weigh in quickly on the issue of whether to replace whether to eliminate the build-to line, give the discretion to the ARB, but have the proviso that you can't have parking in the setback area.
Oh, I was going to say, well, Commissioner
King.
Yeah, thank you. Based on Commissioner Pop's comments, I hesitate to, and the reading of the minutes from their meeting, I hesitate to flip that back over without a more thorough understanding, which I do not possess.
Commissioner Olchuk?
Yeah, no, I don't think that I would support that. At least not one at the expense of the other. And I want to add, another thing, another sort of element here, which is that, and it's too bad Director Gittleman isn't here, because there's this sidewalk in Napa that's boulevard-like, that's associated with the new development that they did, sort of in the, I guess, southern quadrant of Napa, like just when you're coming in across the little river. God, I don't know anything about Napa. But anyways, there's this little sidewalk, and they have, when Board Member Pop was talking about sort of the use of the sidewalk and how, it's not really about the commercial or financial sort of viability of the sidewalk and which tenants were likely to use it and which tenants are not likely to use it, because people don't really necessarily build space specific for service or retail. When they're doing ground floor service and retail, they build it for all comers, right? But anyways, in this sort of notion of there's this one section of sidewalk in Napa where they have this floor sculpture, and it's essentially the cha-cha-cha dance, like the footwork of the cha-cha-cha dance on the sidewalk, right in the middle of your walking area. And so like the 1 foot is 1, and there's 2, and there's 3, and there's 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, and then the person that faces you, their feet are also like that. So if you both step on foot space, and you all get what I'm saying? Anyways, my point is, I was sitting at a restaurant, like right next to that, and I swear to you, for the whole hour and 15 minutes that I was at this restaurant, not a single group that walked past this foot thing didn't try it, right? So you see all these people are doing this, and I thought, like, God, whoever thought of that, they will never know how appreciative, how profound an impact they had on my dinner, because it was amazing, and it did create life on a street. I will argue that there is no life on El Camino. I have never walked down El Camino, ever. I don't think I've ever parked on El Camino. One time maybe I stopped at Mike's Bikes, and even that was sort of scary because I couldn't even get out of my car. It is not what it is. It's certainly not what it could be, and I don't think we're going to get there by being too restrictive, because it'll just sort of discourage maybe the thoughtful development that we'd like to see. So I think the notion of increasing flexibility, certainly we don't. Not every single part of our El Camino, Palo Alto's El Camino, has to be walkable, right? We should be focusing on the low-hanging fruit. There should be. I am fully confident that the ARB will be able to identify the right projects that, we really want to see more X from you. We think that this setback should be a little farther back because you're right next to X and Y and Z, and this is starting to look like a nice little walkable area, and we should encourage that in the redevelopment. And I think that's really the key, encouraging redevelopment of assets there that are no longer appealing. So again, I don't think I would support the notion of just eliminating the build to line and then having, or the setback, I guess it's the maximum.
No, that's not parking.
Yeah, I think that having a setback range is more effective at articulating the vision idea than solely saying we don't want parking in the front. So, and I want to say one other thing. I'm hoping that the ARB will handle the issues related to the height of the arcades and the depth of the arcades, and and we won't really ever deal with it. And I think we shouldn't consider the use of this is sort of in response to Commissioner King's comments. I'm not sure really we should be weighing into consideration whether a potential tenant would use outdoor space into whether the developer who's investing a tremendous amount of money into rehabilitating an asset or even redeveloping an asset. We've all had conversations about encouraging ground floor retail, ground floor service, ground floor restaurants and the like, and I think you're talking about a decision that they would have to make so far in advance about how they would use their floor area that you would be maybe encouraging people to shy away from restaurants, because immediately if there was a potential for using space for tables, they'd be like, no, no restaurants, we'll just be retail here because we want that space on the 5th floor. And so every time we create sort of they're going to find a way to get the space they want, and it may be, the result may be like no restaurants for a quarter mile, and maybe that's something we didn't really want because the dollar per square foot of the space is so valuable that they're just saying no to it. So it's important.
Thank you. Acting Vice Chair Tanaka, you want to weigh in? Sure.
So I think a lot of interesting points by my fellow commissioners. So I'm not sure about the proposal, so I think it'd be good to get the ARB's take on it. But I did have some other thoughts. So it's been a while since I've been at the Champs-Élysées in Paris, but last time I went there, it's kind of like a freeway in the middle. I mean, it's a lot of cars. It's not like very slow moving traffic. It's fairly wide boulevard. And so I was thinking, it's not, at least car-wise, it's not that different from El Camino, except that El Camino is a lot shabbier, not nearly exciting. Some serious redevelopment probably should happen. I also don't have many fond memories walking along El Camino. I, for one, would love to see something grand like that, a true grand boulevard, something that people would walk down and go, wow. I don't know if it's possible, and we're pretty far from there right now, but I think, having things that help facilitate that is actually a good thing. Because I've been thinking also, like, when I drive down El Camino, and it's kind of surprising, there's still like vacant lots, or there's still places where there's incredible underutilization of the actual land. And so I think Commissioner Alchuk is right that we do need to encourage or have things to encourage the redevelopment, because I think that's probably one of the biggest issues actually on El Camino. But I think in general I still like what this direction where this trying to have wider sidewalks, trying to make it more walkable. But I do think we should, we are a fairly high-end city, and I think we should have, higher sites, and I don't think it's unreasonable for us to try to shoot for Champs-Élysées. I think that's something that we should try to do. Thanks.
Thank you. So I'm just going to encourage the ARB to think about this issue and weigh in at your next meeting and see which way makes sense, and whether an approach like this would increase your flexibility or cause more problems than would otherwise be. This is separate from the issue of setbacks, and I would actually, at least for El Camino, like to be a little bit more directive. And suggest something along the lines of a minimum setback from the curb of being 12 feet, arcades being allowed within that setback. And an average setback from the curb being in a range 15 feet to something maybe a little more than that, depending on the nature of that. And obviously the average setback only counts where you have building. If you have a driveway, the average setback is not to the rear. That space doesn't count. So I'm wondering if Board Member Pop would like to weigh in on that notion. We're trying to make it worth your while to actually have to come to the meeting.
No, it's good. I'm glad I showed up. So specifically, you're looking for some feedback about the idea of average setback?
The idea of a minimum setback and an average that's somewhat greater than that, and realize that could be modified by virtue of the arcade.
So I would say squarely, minimum setback, yes. Right? Important to say we need at least X square feet. In some cases, might go up to 15 feet is what we're suggesting, maybe even more. I think, again, the issue here is that there are so many different types of sites along El Camino. I mean, staff was great. They produced all these maps for us, and we were able to look at all these things, and we each took different sections and study. There's no one size fits all, certainly, and I don't think even establishing an average setback would be beneficial. I think that's too restrictive. I think what we need to do is really take these site by site, state some goals, identify some concepts, and say, now tell us what is right for this site, and then we provide feedback as the Architecture Review Board to help assess whether or not it's appropriate in its context. And
If you had the tool of being able to deal with minimum setback and a minimum average setback, and remove in terms of flexibility on that as an alternative to a fixed build two line, would that be helpful?
yes, I think it would.
So maybe that's something to consider in the mix.
Yeah, absolutely. And I'll give as an example. We were just presented with one of the sites along Alma, where currently there's a special setback along Alma. There's these garages that are in the front setback right now. Really, the very first building has come forward to say, we want to knock down that old decrepit thing and build a new building that was completely within the envelope of what's allowed in zoning. But the ARB pushed back on the applicant and said, it's about the context. And although by right you should be allowed to have this height and this certain setback and to build it the way you've described it, it's just not right because you're the first one out of the gate. And if there were others around you, this would be a perfectly compatible and appropriate solution. But because there aren't others that are developed yet, it's challenging for us to move it forward. And I think that's exactly the case here as well, where the hope is that these unpleasant structures that are along El Camino come down, and we get buildings that are farther back, and we get sidewalks that are pleasant, and it becomes this really nice space, and all of a sudden it becomes someplace that you'd want to go for a walk, or you'd feel safe parking your car and getting out. But until we get a momentum about this, I think we're going to need some flexibility in order to incorporate these projects in and around other things that are there. We're not going to just start out with the accelerator at 100 miles an hour. We need to ramp up into this a little bit.
Thank you. I hope we don't accelerate to 100 miles an hour on a 35 mile an hour speed limit street. Sorry.
Point taken.
Are there anybody else want to weigh in on anything else? Yes?
Yeah, could I just, because if I might, you did say minimum setback of 12 feet. In our tables 3 and 4, there is a minimum setback, and the way it's phrased is 0 to 10 feet. If you put it at 0, that's when you're trying to, you're doing the 8-foot, right at the property line. If you're doing the 10 feet, that's going to be 18 feet. Okay, really, but so if you're looking at a 12-foot effective sidewalk requirement, which is currently what we have in El Camino, that's really a 4-foot setback from the front property line to the building, rather than a 12-foot setback. It's it's terminology.
Thank you. I'm really referring to a 12-foot effective sidewalk width and a setback appropriately to that. Thanks for the correction. Anybody else on the commission wish to weigh in before?
Can I just say one thing?
Should we
ask a question?
Yes, Commissioner, I'll check quickly.
Do we? I'm just curious. Do we know what the Champs-Élysées setback is? Just out of curiosity, because I was in Paris like maybe a year and a half ago, and I thought it felt like 50 feet.
I think this is kind of funny. I guess I heard at the July 31st meeting, I thought I heard Eduardo to say he's going to do his research on the Champs-Élysées. I don't know if that happened. Does anyone know if he went and did the research? Because he's not here.
I'm looking at.
Yeah, we can look that up and be ready at the next meeting.
I'm looking at pictures from my trip, but we're far away from that. I think that
must
size,
be a dimension.
I feel like the size of El Camino was the setback, and the Champs-Élysées you could literally have a marching band stand next to each other and still be on the sidewalk. But it would be interesting, in my opinion, and I think we said this last time. I think I said this last time, but I'm not 100% sure, to see what other cities are doing and in this context, especially since this Grand Boulevard is actually not just our idea. I think there are other cities on the El Camino that are contemplating this. So I'm almost positive I made this point last time. I'll have to go through the notes, but I feel like it would be very informative to sort of see what are they doing in Redwood City about this and Mountain View. And then what do others, what's happening in Brooklyn and in Tel Aviv, and how do they compare to this idea?
Commissioner King.
Thank you. Yes. So I did have a question of staff and Commissioner Pop. What input have the local practicing design and development professionals had into these changes? Have you spoken to them? Do they feel this would make things easier, better, harder, more expensive?
Yes, so, Randy Pop's here representing the ARB. Certainly this conversation has been going on for a while in retreats and such. And, Randy's connected with other, architects and as are the ARB. So I'm sure there's been some informal conversations, but we have not had any formal outreach outside of the retreats and public hearings that we've had to date.
The one thing I would add is that regionally, there have been a lot of architects and developers engaged in the Grand Boulevard principles, not necessarily in Palo Alto, but throughout the peninsula. And I think what developers want more than anything is certainty. So to the extent that we can provide certainty through this ordinance, because there isn't much certainty right now in Palo Alto given the current dynamic, as much as we could work through these issues and provide some certainty in their code, I think it would be looked upon favorably.
And so you're saying that this provides more certainty than currently exists, is that correct?
Correct, yes, because right now we have a council direction that has gone forward and hasn't reached a conclusion yet.
I understand. So it may be, okay, so it may be more uncertain than existing ordinance, but it's more certain than what the fact that there's in play right now. So they don't like the fact that it's in play.
Correct.
So they want a faster resolution, but it may end up providing less flexibility to them.
Yeah, even if, I think even something that provides less flexibility in the end but certain is better than something that's uncertain.
Got it. Okay. Thank you.
The fact that we're presented with the choice to evaluate a DEE time and time and time again is very challenging. As an architect who has done projects like this, I can tell you that when you are not clear, it's a gating item in your project, and you cannot move forward until you get the yes that you need to get or the no, so you know which way to go. And it can come at enormous cost, just enormous cost to have to wait like that on a project. And so anything we can do to streamline the process and to remove unknowns and barriers in the approvals is helpful, not just to applicants, but also to those of us who are tasked with reviewing the projects.
And then I'll ask a general question. When you described a situation in which the applicant came to you with a project which was on paper met all of our criteria, and yet the ARB said, well, yeah, it does, but we don't want to approve it. I assume you have the power to actually tell them they can't build that building, even though it fits our criteria. Is that correct?
No, and I'm going to ask staff to clarify this for me, but my understanding is that we make a recommendation to the planning director, and the director issues direction to the applicant in regard to approval or not.
I think in this case, there, and I don't want to get too far into it because, if, for instance, they ask for a variance to allow something in the special setback because the context is that way, that could potentially come to the Planning Commission. So, you could end up getting involved with that.
Okay, yeah,
So,
let's just, we'll cancel that.
Yeah.
I see Cara will smile when I cancel that, I'm sure. Okay, great, thank you. That's all, the only questions I had.
Acting Vice Chair Tanaka, do you want to add anything? So I'm going to close by basically suggesting something to think about. And so firstly, what's interesting about this is that we were specifically directed by the City Council to make El Camino wider for a greater effective sidewalk. And I'm not convinced that the ordinance as presented to us does that, because it could be a 12-foot sidewalk, effective sidewalk, and it appears that that could satisfy the ordinance. And so effectively, I'm not sure I see an actual change in what is required, per se, because it does give a range of 12 to 18 foot, and 12 foot is within that range, and 12 foot is what we require now. So it doesn't necessarily create that. So what I would suggest that we consider as an alternative, and I'm not going to make this a motion, but I'd like the ARB to consider it, is first of all a minimum setback from the curb of 12 feet. Secondly, a minimum average setback from the curb of 15 feet. A average setback from the curb of a range of 15 to 18 feet. No build to line requirement, and no parking in front of the building. So that's something to play with. And by having an average setback in the range of 15 to 18 feet, that basically does provide the effectiveness of something close enough to the sidewalk to be usable. It also gives a minimum since the minimum of the average is 15 feet, it means that you do effectively have the buildings further back by at least 3 feet on the average. I would exclude from that calculation places where there is no building. So, for example, a driveway or whatever to the back doesn't count. So an average setback from the curb, average setback from the curb, average effective sidewalk width of being at least 15, between 15 and 18 feet. And I'm just suggesting that as a way of dealing with the issue. And if there's any other comments about that? Commissioner King.
Are you asking for comments on your specific comment, or? Oh, no, I do not have a comment.
Any other comments people wish to add before? I guess we'll need a motion, but is any other comments before we make a motion?
Well, that's sort of my question on the motion. So in staff's goal, if we were to say we move to recommend to council items 1 through 4, is that direction you're hoping for?
Well, it's certainly a direction. I think, again, we've identified that we're going back to AIRB on the 20th. We heard Acting Chair Keller's request, and that's what the AIRB was requesting, to get some guidance, some alternatives perhaps to the ordinance. And then the next meeting that we see you for, we could capture this in a revised draft ordinance as an alternative. Yeah.
Okay.
So certainly, if you wanted to do a straw poll on what you wanted to see with respect to this ordinance, you could do that.
Okay. So what I'm hearing is it's not really that helpful. You're certainly not going to go home mad if we don't refer these items as written here to council.
No, we wouldn't go home mad. I mean, what we were hoping for. Yes, we have thick skin. No, I think in general, what we were looking for coming into here is some type of motion related to numbers 1 through 4, but specifically about El Camino Real. So we would say move forward the motion, move forward as staff's recommended for motions 1 through 4 as they relate to El Camino Real, because we had a broader scope initially. Now, if there is something, for instance, Acting Chair Keller's recommendations that could slightly modify these, that would be fine as well too. But we would like 1 through 4 move forward as specifically focus on El Camino. There's no huge heartbreak if it doesn't happen. We could have another follow-up meeting, but that's what we would like to see.
Okay. Well, I also move that we recommend to council, and we're not actually asking for action because we don't have an ordinance, correct? So we're just review. Or
there is an ordinance.
Attachment A. But it needs some cleaning, that ordinance that's there. So it's as to be modified. But the concept of going wider than 12 feet, perhaps the 15 feet as a target, if that's what I'm hearing, that we'd like to have ARB look at one more time.
If I could clarify, the ordinance is there for guidance in case you wanted to get into more detail. I think at this point it's more helpful for staff to just have the guiding principles, and then we will go back to the ordinance to incorporate your guiding principles and move it on to the council.
Okay, so a motion could be to support staff in the further advancement of these items as they relate, as items 1 through 4, as they relate to specifically to the El Camino Real corridor. Okay, and then I would add for discussion that I would ask relative to item 4 that we ask staff for further study as to whether the additional sidewalk width provided by applicants shall be dedicated for public use, or whether applicant may retain for private or restricted use that sidewalk area.
So is that your motion, or?
That is my motion.
So can you get? I have to write it down. So you're basically moving staff recommendation.
We're supporting.
Your microphone.
Thank you. Supporting staff's further study of items 1 through 4, specific to their application in the El Camino Real corridor. And then I'm adding that we ask staff for the rider on there that I mentioned.
And could you give me the wording of that?
Yep. That we ask staff for further study as to whether the additional sidewalk width provided by applicants shall be dedicated for public use or whether it may be retained for private or restricted use by the applicant.
Okay, if you could say it a little slower, I got to write this down because I got to give it to
Okay.
the staff tomorrow morning. So, ask staff for further study of
As to whether the additional sidewalk
as to whether the additional
sidewalk width provided
sidewalk width provided
by applicants shall be dedicated for public use or may be retained for private or restricted use by the applicant.
or can be retained for private use by applicant.
May be retained for private or restricted use by the applicant.
Okay, I'll second that. Okay, do you want us to speak to your motion?
No.
Okay, hold on a second. I'd like to make a friendly amendment, if I may. And the friendly amendment is to add to this to ask the staff and ARB to consider the potential for a combination of minimum setback and average setback. So that's the first amendment.
I accept that.
And the second friendly amendment I'd like to offer is that the ARB consider whether, in conjunction with that consideration, there's a potential for eliminating the build-to requirement, providing that there's no parking in front of the building.
I accept that.
Okay. So I think we've beat this to death enough. Are there any other amendments? Commissioner Alchuk.
So I think, it wasn't really present in our discussion here today, but I don't think you can have a conversation about setback for many of the parcels on El Camino without having a discussion about height. And I think, so my friendly amendment would be to suggest that staff also add a concept related to increasing height in conjunction, increasing the flexibility with respect to height in conjunction with this quote-unquote range of setbacks. I know we talked a little bit about floor area and sort of reallocating that, but I think it would also make sense to talk about height. And so that's my friendly amendment.
I'm going to reject that, not because I think it's necessarily a bad idea, but because I would like to use this opportunity as a straw poll to see if we want to incorporate that.
Sure.
Okay. So let's consider it unfriendly amendment.
Okay, that's considered unfriendly amendment. Does anybody wish to second that unfriendly amendment? So we have a amendment by Commissioner Olchek, second by Acting Vice Chair Tanaka. And could you give me the wording of your?
Yeah, I mean, this is all sort of loose. We're just suggesting the further study of concepts. So I would be adding the concept of increasing height to the suggested, look, they're going to build an ordinance out of these idea concepts. So one of the concepts is the setback, and the second concept would be increased height as a result of increased setback.
So let me ask clarifying questions to your motion.
I think that any specificity that you're looking for here is going to be lost on me, because the whole point is that what we're really asking them to do is spend some more time thinking about something.
Well, let me ask my question, and then you can figure out whether it will be lost on you. I don't think so. My question is whether your intention is to initiate a study of height that will take place in the next month before this ordinance comes back to us, or whether your idea of initiating a study on height is of longer term and not as part of this rush ordinance that we're asked to do for this council.
So let me put it this way. If I asked the staff to look into the setbacks that other cities along El Camino are considering with respect to the Grand Boulevard and what other Grand Boulevard locales are considering, would you feel uninformed if you didn't also know what the height limits were in those areas? Wouldn't you feel like you were literally looking at just one half of an equation? So my point is that this is such an integral part of the discussion, the height, that to not have a bullet, to not have one of our approaches to this Grand Boulevard include flexibility with respect to height needs to be addressed.
So you're suggesting that a consideration of height be made within this ordinance in this cycle?
I'm saying
that's what I'm trying to clarify.
Absolutely.
I think the staff I think the staff needs to know whether your intention is to consider height with respect to the cycle when we're going to have this come back to us in a month or so, or whether you're initiating a long.
No, look, I'm perfectly. I think we've had a number of discussions about the Grand Boulevard that if City Council reviewed our minutes, they would be very well informed about what we think. So I'm not suggesting they come back to us. I'm suggesting that they add that concept to the discussion and take it to. I'm very comfortable sending this right back up. We were asked to sort of increase the sidewalk. These are some ways to accomplish that, and I think the discussion that we've had has been informed. And so, I'm going to support the motion, but I would have been more supportive of a motion that just sort of pushed this process along. They're going to go back to the ARB for sort of a consult, but I don't think they need to come back to us. But
well, let me ask this as staff: is it your expectation that after the ordinance is drafted, after ARB, that this does come back to the commission?
Yeah, I think we, certainly what's in front of us today has some additional changes. So, ideally we get the final product that we think is going to council to you, so for your full vote. And it would be nice to have the rest of the commission.
Actually, I'll add one correction to that. What we're asking for now is we would clean up as directed by you, and we would bring the ordinance to the council without checking back to the planning commission. However,
that's what I understand.
However, there's these greater issues which I definitely think we need to address, like height, like a number of other urban design type issues that we need to work through our entire code, actually not our entire code, but specifically focused portions of our code that we do need to come back to the commission as well as the ARB with over the next few months. But for this one specific ordinance, we weren't intending to come back to you.
So just to clarify my position, I would have supported a motion more sincerely that moved this process along. But since we're sort of asking for a lot more study, I'm tacking on this notion that height be considered. But if there was a way for me to propose a motion that moved this process to the ARB for their tweaking of the issue that's in front of us, and then to the City Council for sort of a discussion of how they want to make this a reality, and then in theory a second motion that brought these topics up to us for further study session, I would support that more than but I don't want to fight the majority here. So
what I understand that you're saying is that, correct me if I'm wrong, I think you're saying that the height should be considered by the ARB in their review process, or what are you suggesting? What is the text of your motion, of your amendment?
I would suggest that concepts be developed related to increasing height as a result of increasing setbacks.
And is there a time frame? I mean, is this something that you're expecting to be in
I'm
the
like
ordinance in a month from
amending a
now?
motion.
No,
I don't know.
I think it's interesting to say, are you expecting this to come back and when this goes before us and goes to council?
Well,
or-
I was hopeful that we would be able to have a motion that went straight. I was hopeful that we would be able to move this process along, but since my sense is that the mover has suggested that he would like to hear more on the topics that he requested further study, which I think was the way he started his motion, I am suggesting that we add this topic for further study to the topics he's asking for further study on. So the assumption here is that the mover and the seconder would like this to come before us at least one more time before the ordinance is designed. My personal opinion is that the ordinance just be moved along. But since we're going, it looks like the route of further study, the time frame is the same time frame that our mover and our seconder need for further study of all these topics.
And
Okay.
through the chair, one question. I did not understand your motion to say, come back to us again before we go to council. Is that what you were saying? I mean,
Well, and this is
because
why...
that wasn't the staff's recommendation, so.
Yeah, and this is why humans speak to each other, because there's sometimes lack of clarity. So I used the words further study, which I fully understand that Commissioner Alchek took to mean, took the words for what they say. In reality, upon reflection, I realized what I really meant was for discussion as you move this forward.
Okay. That's what I was
That I would not want it to get to council without having people discussed, hey, how are we going to treat this? Because I believe this is an important consideration. I'm not saying, I don't know what the right answer is, but I think it's an important consideration that people think through the topic which I have addressed.
We would put further analysis in before, and a recommendation in before we went to council.
Okay.
So then I take your motion as that you're recommending that this not come back to the PTC, but that perhaps we be told about it at the next meeting as to what was decided for the ARB.
Exactly, and we're going to have a joint meeting with the ARB and the PTC coming up, and I think these greater issues are something that we have to talk about during that meeting.
Thank you. So I'm not going to support the unfriendly amendment precisely because I don't think it should be in this quick process for going to the council.
For clarity, are you still seconding the motion as it is now? Is that how you understood it?
I seconded the original motion.
But are you, as...
there's an amendment on the floor, it's an unfriendly amendment.
No, I know, but the motion was sort of re-clarified, so are you still in support of that?
I'm fine with the motion and that as it stated, that it's not going back. Okay, that's fine. In any event, what I'm saying is that I don't think that a consideration...
I'm withdrawing my amendment, though, because...
Okay, you're withdrawing your amendment?
Yeah, because now the discussion isn't coming back to us, in which case I'm pretty sure they're going to have that discussion anyways. So I'm withdrawing the amendment because I have full faith that the ARB and the City Council will have a discussion about height when they talk about this. So I'm withdrawing that motion.
Okay. I'll actually... Thank you. I'll actually indicate that I think that a discussion about increasing heights in the city is a larger discussion that should not be put as part of this ordinance. And if there's a consideration of height, it needs to be a broad-based discussion, not buried in a motion, not buried in an ordinance that's really a quick fix. So I would not support that moving forward. So I don't agree with that. I'm not sure if anybody else wants to weigh on that.
Let's withdraw.
I'm withdrawn, but since the idea's been presented, I'm indicating my disagreement with it. Anybody else wish to weigh in?
I'm going to weigh in because the ARB's already had a discussion about how height should be a part of it, so they would probably have that discussion again on the 20th. You know, whether that gets incorporated in this, we haven't put it in here, and we probably won't. However, it's in the record that will go to council in the minutes, so they will see that it's a consideration that is related to this. It just isn't in the ordinance.
Great, thank you. Unless there's anything else, any other comments? Anybody? Then I'll call the question. All in favor of the motion as amended, which is to move the support staff and further study for the El Camino, South El Camino design guidelines. Is that right? What's the exact word?
That's an adjunct. That's a related project, but it's not this. This is the ordinance going forward.
So we recommend that the Planning Translation has reviewed and discussed the concepts for the draft ordinance and recommends points 1 through 4 as decided by, as indicated in the staff report, with the additional provisions of 1, ask staff for further study as to whether the addition of sidewalk width provided by the applicant should be dedicated to public use or may be returned for private or restricted use by the applicant. 2, consider the combination of minimum setback and average setback as a way of accomplishing increased setbacks as desired by the council. And 3, consider the combination of eliminating build 2 lines and no parking in the front as a way of accomplishing the goal along with that. Yes?
I believe you missed the word specific to El Camino Real. Items 1 through 4 are specific to El Camino Real corridor.
The items 1, 2, and 3 are specific to El Camino Real, yes.
Okay. Okay.
All right.
Is that accurate for staff? Okay, and then the word, you said the word returned by the applicant relative to my addition, but it should be retained. You may have just been misreading it and we'll correct it, but it is, will the sidewalk use be retained by the applicant?
All right, I wrote down retained. Thank you.
Okay.
Retained by the applicant, yes? What? Sure, go ahead. I think, Commissioner, I'll check as a question of Cara.
So I'm just curious from your perspective, is there a component of the setback that's required? So let's say we increase the size of the setback. Does that have any effect on the designation of that area of land as public or private?
It depends on how the ordinance is framed. If it's framed in terms of an effective sidewalk width, then it really doesn't matter if it's public or private. If we want to encourage an actual public dedication of the private property for exclusive right-of-way use, then of course it becomes, public property. And there are some other related issues associated with requiring an additional dedication of sidewalk for properties that already have, a sidewalk in front of them. So I think it is I think it's an issue. It's certainly involved in the mix.
Okay, I'm only asking that question because I think I'm a little bit confused about your first addition to the set, and not. I actually don't think it's time well spent to sort of figure it out. I think I'm going to support the motion, but I think it's I'm a little unclear what you're going for with your first addition, but we can talk about that another time.
Anything else? Okay, all in favor say aye. 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 All opposed? The motion carries unanimously. Motion made by Commissioner King and seconded by Acting Chair Keller, and with amendments. And I think we have a few other housekeeping things we need to do. We don't have any minutes to approve. Any other meetings? Commission reports. Okay. In that case, the meeting is adjourned at 8:33. Thank you very much.